Hi, everyone. Welcome to our latest cybersecurity webinar. My name is Jason Yakinchek. I'm the president of the chapter, and I'm pleased to introduce today's topic, the impact of COVID-19 on the supply chain by Scott Fashel. So if this is your first webinar that you've tuned into or you've been attending a handful of them that we've produced over the last month or two, a lot of the recordings are available online, so I hope you enjoy this one. You're welcome to self-report CPEs at the conclusion of any of the seminars that you watch. So there's one way that we're providing online education to our members and the community during a time where we can't all get together for our normal in-person conferences that we do throughout the year. And before we begin, I'd like to introduce some of the partners here and thank them for their contributions. So without the support of the groups that you see on the screen here, we would not be able to execute a lot of the webinars and cybersecurity workshops that we've done over the last couple months. And being able to do multiple of these a week is a big hurdle and accomplishment. So thanks to everyone who's been involved in this process. And then also on that note, same thing with the sponsors and their contributions and support of the chapter has always been something we really greatly appreciate, and it enables us to do more for our membership and give back to the community. So thanks again to the sponsors. And then also the volunteers, their countless hours of dedication and selflessness to service to the chapter really enables us to do a ton for our community, especially during a difficult time like we're going through now. So the volunteers are the lifeblood of the chapter, and without them, we wouldn't be able to do nearly anything that compared to the volume of events and services that we're able to put on for the chapter. So thanks to everyone who's engaged regularly in supporting the events that we do. And then if you're interested in presenting or getting involved, showcasing an area of expertise, kind of building your brand, or even just giving feedback, reach out to academics at isacagwdc.org and let us know what you're interested in, and we'll get you engaged in some way or another. And then I want to introduce today's presenter, Scott Fashel. Scott applies his more than 30 years of financial, managerial, and cybersecurity IT experience as mid-sized companies transition to the cloud environment. Mr. Fashel has consulted for a range of companies from Fortune 500, such as AT&T, Dun & Bradstreet, to mid-sized and small businesses. He's currently the owner and client executive for Soder Cloud Solutions, which works with the supply chain management entities concerned with transportation, logistics, and fulfillment. Scott's also been a very great volunteer for the chapter for multiple years now, helping out with events, partnerships, and different outreach throughout the community. So he's done a great deal to really better the chapter and help us accomplish our mission and give back to members. So I'm excited for today's presentation, and thanks, Scott, for presenting today.
Great. Thank you, Jason. All right. Again, happy Cinco de Mayo. Thank you for joining us. Cinco de Mayo, as you know, is celebrating the win of a battle by Mexico over France, and maybe we can celebrate soon our victory over COVID-19. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about supply chain, and it's entitled The Tale of Two Supply Chains. It is the best of times and it is the worst of times. And I'll get into that. We'll be concentrating most on what the problem is, the worst of times, but we also want to mention that there's a bright future for supply chains. So it's an age of digital transformation. That's the good times, and it's the age of potential calamity, and that's the bad times. But before we get into that, let's try to understand what the supply chain is. There's a lot of definitions out there for supply chain. It's really just a network of trying to get the products from their original raw material states into a finished product that brings it all the way to the consumer. And there's a few steps along the way that takes place for that. Here's a brief example that we'll go through to help you kind of picture what the supply chain is. If you look to the left, you'll see the supplier. And supplier is going to be raw materials. This happens to be for retail, but it can be for anything. It could be computer components or whatever. You have to start with your raw basic elements. If it could be lumber, it could be metals, all those things are the raw materials. They're then transported to the factory, and the factory then takes those raw materials and makes them into a product. Give you an example of that. I did a consulting project for a medium-sized factory company that produced insulation for buildings. If you ever see buildings going up and you'd see that the steel beams had insulation sprayed on them, that is the insulation I'm talking about. So they would take rock and melt it and spin it like cotton candy. And that's how they created the product. So here you're taking that raw material and the factory is changing that product. And then they were shipping it out to a distributor. Now that distributor, you can see, is the next line, and that distributor can be shipping, it could be by truck, by train, but it's to get it to the wholesaler, and that wholesaler then moves it to the retailer, and then on to the consumer. And you can see how the information flows back to provide information to adjust the product appropriately for the factory. So that gives you a rough idea, just as a picture, of the flow of how it goes from one end all the way to the other end. Because many times I've heard the stories of the question, where do you get meat? Well, you go to the supermarket. Great. But where did it start from? So that's what we're going to try to look at a little bit. Now, the transportation can be trucks or so forth, but the largest transportation internationally, 90% of all international trade is done through shipping. And you can see these type of containers here. If you look closely, if you're not familiar with this, each one of those containers really can be pulled by a truck, and they can just stack them right up. If you just go out to the Chesapeake Bay, you'll see a lot of ships going up and down the intercoastal waterway, whether they're on their way to Baltimore or Philadelphia. Many times they'll go up through the Chesapeake Bay. But not all the ships have to be of that design. These are actually ships that are used in Jakarta, Indonesia. This is not my picture, but I was down there just looking at their harbor, and these ships filled the harbor, and they looked like I was back in the 19th century. But they were loaded with lumber, and they were fully used, and half of them looked like they could use a little refit, but other than that, whatever can transport that product is part of the system. So now what I want to do is take an example of something that's been in the news, and there it is. It's toilet paper. It has been questioned, and how is it running out of our supply? Do we have an issue? So we're going to take a little closer look, because the concerns have been the end is near. We're going to run out of toilet paper. So is that true? Let's look a little deeper to see what's involved and if there is a shortage. So we have to start to look at what's the source. Remember our diagram. You have a source, it goes all the way through distribution to the consumer, factory, and so forth. The source of toilet paper actually comes from wood pulp. Virgin pulp is really used in the US. It's coming from Canada and the US. That is used to produce toilet paper, but recycled pulp can also be used. But an interesting fact, I'm not familiar with this, but 27,000 trees per day are used to supply toilet paper. So it's quite a big operation. So here's the flow of the product itself. Again, it's a similar flow to the distribution. Notice on the upper left, you have forestry operations. That's the previous slide where the virgin forest was there. Those, by the way, those forests are replanted. It's not that they're cutting down virgin forest or replanting trees, but virgin pulp. Big difference. So that is operations are to cut that down, then to process it. It will go to a initial production where they'll produce large rolls of it. These are called parent rolls. and they're 100 inches width. Then those are trucked over to a paper converting and packaging. So from there, it could be used for anything. It could be used for paper that you write on. It could be used for toilet paper. It's a paper processing function. This diagram doesn't go into distribution, but then it would be distributed and go all the way to the retail and consumer use. And many times with paper, it can be, if it's regular paper that you recycle, it can be used again. So let's go over what happened. Now that you know how it basically works, what happened with this whole shortage area? Well, people started hoarding. They got concerned. And all of a sudden they were wiping out the stores. You saw people with baskets full of toilet paper and that, that they can use for years to come, it seems. But what it did is put a strain on the system. And so now all of a sudden you had this disconnect where there had a large outflow from the shelves because people were staying at home. So they were using more toilet paper in the home use. So why doesn't it just fill up right away? Well, you have to realize that the mills that are out there are running 24/7. They are already set up, they're already functioning, they're at full capacity. So it's not as though there's an idle machine that they can just kick in and produce more capacity. They'd really have to build and retool. That costs money, that takes time. And it also is looked at, this is a short-term spike. So is it really a smart investment to do that? Okay. So what they tried to do was to just take out one of the links in the supply chain to speed things up as a stopgap, not ongoing, because distributors play a vital function in the whole scenario, the whole supply chain. But by taking out the distributor, you can see the X across there. Then they could go directly from factory to the wholesaler to get the products out faster to handle that increased demand. But I want to make a point here that it's not all toilet paper. We don't have a shortage of toilet paper. We have a shortage of household toilet paper because remember, office buildings, all public bathrooms, they're all closed. They're not buying any toilet paper. So if you look at the bottom left, those big rolls, they're out there. There's plenty of toilet paper in stock. What we don't have is the soft, squeezable toilet paper like Mr. Whipple would have for Charmin. I guess I'm dating myself. Some of you might not be familiar with that commercial. So just a point there is that there is toilet paper out there, but it's not the squeezable soft one. So now I want to broaden out. Now that you have an idea of what the supply chain is, an example of what it entails, now let's look at the worst of times, the age of potential calamity. There was a disruption. Let's look at the food supply. All of a sudden, it's been in news as well that people are looking to close their plants or trim down, or people are sick. Because in South Dakota, Smithfield, which is a large processor, had 300 workers that tested positive. So if nothing else, they've now greatly decreased their staff. And it became a point of, well, do we close these factories? Well, if you close those factories, it has an impact across the supply chain. What's feeding those factories are farmers who are raising animals for meat production. And they're looking at, if it was to be cut back, it'd be the culling of millions of animals rather than it going through the process to feed the United States, for instance. And also, if you do that, now you're going to end up with meat shortages, and that could last for months. Depends on how intense it is. And where shortages are, there's price increases. So it has, what I'm trying to point out here is it has a disruption can have many can have an impact across the whole chain if you really take one of those links out, such as the processing in the factories. The WTO, World Trade Organization, felt that international trade could really fall back to the Great Depression, 1929-30, if things continue as they're going. So let's try to uncover what came out of all this. What did the industry in general, try to learn from all this? Found that there's a few weaknesses. First of all, it became very clear how connected the global supply chains really are. We're not in an isolated world at all, though we never thought that. It's just that your connection to certain countries and certain areas and how they're going to be transported truly came into light. The focus of having your single supplier be from one location, one country, is referred to as supply side risk. The risk of having just one country, one supplier. So what happened with China? China cut off the export of some of its products, the medical products, which really brought this to light, that when you rely on a single geographic location, that either cuts it off or transportation can't be employed, then you have a problem. Also, air traffic. Global air traffic dropped down greatly. I did some work for US Airlines, US Airways back in the day. And what US Airways would do is transport flowers in on passenger planes, not on ships or anything, because they would be cut and sent immediately to market because they had to be maintained at a certain temperature and had to get there quickly. So they couldn't go on ships or anything. They had to go on planes. Well, if the plane stopped flying, there's limited cargo space in the belly of the plane. And so therefore they were competition. They weren't able to get them out, and people weren't going to the store and buying them. But again, it shows that how dependent we are on that transportation system. And also is the time to delivery, the revisiting that. How long does it really take? And also you might have been aware of Panama, which of course has a canal. It shut down passage of passenger ships and possibly other container ships. But I know passenger ships for sure because of the virus. It changes has a great impact on shipping. Because if you have to go all the way around the tip of South America to get from one ocean, one Atlantic to the Pacific or vice versa, it takes a lot of time and at a great cost. So it impacts the whole supply chain. So these are some of the weaknesses that really came to light, were talked about before, but became very evident. There was an inertia up to that point, and how things were done for a decade or 2 decades, and they all of a sudden had to be revisited. There was a push in the supply chain industry to really keep your inventory light, low. Why? Because it costs money in order to store those items. And you really were focused on quick to market, quick transportation to get it right out to market to sell. So now it's revisiting, say, well, maybe we have to look at this and maybe build some buffers into our inventory plan, especially for essential items. Collaboration. What's moving now is, it used to you collaborate with one, who you're getting something from and who you're going to. Now collaboration is looked more as a whole. Maybe the whole team now needs to collaborate. We'll talk about that in technology to come. But now the whole team needs to collaborate in order to see the network, know what's going on, to work through these issues, know early on, so everybody can adjust. Also started looking at transportation options. I talked about the flowers. That's hard to do, but there's many products that maybe instead of being on ships can be flown, or vice versa, or transportation over land, trucks, maybe look at trains. But keep in mind that as a business, you have to be able to move into this shift to this new transportation area. For instance, let's say you always use trucks. Well, now you want to, something happens, you want to use trains because shipping has stopped down. For instance, in New York City, truckers were refusing to drive into New York City because of the outbreak of COVID-19, and they feared for themselves. So they simply stopped going in. So trains provide an alternative to getting things in. But if you have not, worked with the trains before and you don't have any system in place, it's very hard to just spark that up out of nowhere. So you really want to revisit that and say, let's keep our options open. Let's keep a little business over in trains. So if we do have an issue, we can quickly shift over. Also, production prioritization is, what should we really focus on? What is our core business? What do we want to make sure is supported? Alternative supplies. Well, if you're always getting a certain product, do you have a substitute? Do you have something else that can come in and fill that gap so you can keep your production going and keep in the supply chain full? And also supply origin, which we touched on as to where it's coming from. Do you want it just from one country or multiple? So that kind of covers what's going on with the issues that we're facing. I think at this point, though, we should look at cybersecurity. How has this impacted cybersecurity? Well, things happened very quickly. There was a rush to accommodate this sudden change. Some people feel they anticipated it, but to what degree? And many didn't anticipate its severity at all. So what happened? The businesses had to adjust. So all of a sudden they were moving to remote access. And these are some of the issues that started to come up. Remote access, there's a company in this area that has over 40,000 employees that were working on site. They moved those 40,000 employees to remote access in 2 weeks. That's a hero story right there. Took a lot of work, full time, but they were able to do it. So now all of a sudden, though, as your cybersecurity person, you're sitting there looking at these situations. You have a lot more remote access. Wireless networks were set up. They're trying to spread people out. They could be hastily installed. All of a sudden, you were trying to find alternative suppliers. So CEO and CFO and COO, they were bringing in Ocane and moving forward quickly to bring these new suppliers in, which is essential to the business and to address the issue. These are not incorrect things, but these are things that happen that do impact cybersecurity. Staff, people are getting sick. Some of your staff, your cybersecurity staff also might be out.
Have your meeting yet, Eli?
I think we need to mute out.
Hey, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself.
So what this did is it heightened the risk, right? You had new networks, likely not segmented. You had settings in place, things configured in order to address the environment that you had that might have been on-prem and not had remote access. All of a sudden you had phishing and messaging attacks. Ransomware went through the roof. Plenty of figures about that. Phishing attacks were up significantly. At one time they came out and said, oh, we're not going, the bad actor said, we're not going to attack the healthcare system. And they held off for a little bit, but they attacked everything else. So the risk became very high. So the question is, if you're sitting in that seat, how would you react? Would you be surprised, anger? If anybody wants to on the chat, if you would, access that chat and let me know what what your reaction you think it would be. Would you be surprised, angered, fear? Could it be happiness to know that you are uh, a very important person now, or contempt for what happened? So it's a range of emotions. But where I can't see the chat room, is there any response?
Hey Scott, nothing yet, but I did remind everyone. If I get anything, I'll start reading off.
Okay, great. Well, we'll move on.
So there is one.
Okay.
Supportive.
Surprised?
Supportive.
Okay.
The surprise as well. Yep.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I think we all were surprised. For
It's
me,
not a choice.
yeah, that's right.
A lot of surprises. Yeah.
Exactly. So let's look at, let's zoom in on the remote access. What type of things are happening? Manufacturers that were basically working on legacy systems, all of a sudden now we're going remote. Tell me that doesn't change things. The risk profile at your SOC is totally changed. Different operations, not normal. Internal staff, are they trained in order to monitor this remote access? But it created just a playground for threat actors. I mean, this is just wide open. This is what they love because they could go after the low hanging fruit. They could go after for those known vulnerabilities that have gone unpatched because of this sudden shift. Okay. They were targeting employees with phishing attacks. And in general, it created a broader attack surface for these actors. So this next one, does anyone care to guess what this is? Go ahead and onto the chat room and Babur, let's see if anybody will give them about 15 seconds, see if anybody guesses what this machine is.
Heart monitor, ventilator.
That's right. It's a ventilator. Wonderfully
Ventilator,
done.
yeah.
Wonderfully done. Thank you. Well, what has happened is companies were rushing to build these. So you had car companies that they're changing their focus from building automobiles to building ventilators. Change management really got shortchanged in this because they were rushing to it. And I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't rush to it. But now put yourself in that cybersecurity situation that you've got to adjust to these things. You're really getting hit, aren't you? You've got all these changes that we just covered, you know, and look at the picture down the lower right. I look closely at that and I think that woman's smiling underneath because she knows that the House of Dior is going to create a face mask just for her. So a good spot for her. So the question becomes, you're hit with these, what should you do? You're in that situation. You have all these things hitting you at one time and it's on your shoulders. And there you are. And to keep with the times of working from home, what should you do? Well, the first thing you need to do is reassess the risk appetite of the company. Not drive it, not determine it, but to understand. Go to senior management and see what the temperature is. What are they trying to do? Inform them of the risks that are being taken. Not tell them to stop it. Say, if you do this, advise. Maybe you can make some quick adjustments to lessen that risk. But the first thing is to get on board, be a team player, and be able to work with it and know what's going on. Because what's going to happen is people are going to go for availability. And I've been in that situation where things hit the fan and they're going to I want to keep operational first. And they will discard confidentiality and possibly integrity. Your job is to try to maintain that. So you want to record those changes so you can adjust to them. Next thing is you want to engage with suppliers. These are people you work with. You want to see if they're able to operate securely, fulfill their contract obligations that you probably have with them concerning cybersecurity. Go back and revisit their security requirements that you set up initially and see if they still hold and if you need to adjust them. And most important is to open a line of communication, try to get them to share their evidence of bad actors and to maintain visibility, okay? But keep in mind, they are dealing with their issues as well. They are dealing with factories that are loaded with people that have, now you have to adjust to 6 feet. What are you going to do there? They have, keep an open mind that they are dealing with these huge issues themselves. And they're adjusting to what their upper management is doing to handle it. And they have their own security concerns. But by opening the channel and talking directly with them and exchanging information, it really helps you to at least know what's coming down the pike and possibly put in constraints. Another thing you should do is take inventory. People working from home. Okay, so let's go out and inventory those items, those devices. Are they working on their home computer? Are they working on their child's computer, which might have no protection whatsoever? Or their children using their laptops? A lot of people had to do this hastily. Lease inventory, whether they're authorized or not, know what you have. And that way you can identify and go back and be able to chart things. You also have to go and identify, you know, what systems really do they need access to. So maybe you're revisiting, you know, all the accessibility into the system, and identify your critical systems, and of course, do another security assessment. The architecture, you know, everything's changed. You got to step back and rebuild it. Another thing you can do is automate. Now, the software isn't always the full answer to everything, but it starts to give you some early warning signs that trouble might be brewing. You also can maybe leverage this to work with your suppliers in order to help them monitor, or you can monitor them. There's other alternatives. You consider going to a managed services, which I had provided to clients in the past. Data centers. I put clients in data centers now. They enjoy it. Why? Because the data centers are handling those functions as part of the overall operation. And also the cloud, of course. So there are alternatives that you have to start thinking about, that maybe this new design, because remember, it might continue on for a long time that people start working remotely. Why? Companies might come to realize that's cost effective. If you have people that are paying for their own power, paying for their own desk, their own setup, building costs, all those type of things, companies might start realizing that the remote remote access might be to their favor. And so therefore, you're going to have a new paradigm and a new security architecture. And lastly, on this topic is to put in controls. You have to go back and look at your configurations. You're dealing with a lot of mobile devices now. You want to segment. You know, go now, you've got this evaluation, go and start segmenting health protection. Separation is one of the basic and most important and effective cybersecurity tools. VDI, which can host the desktop and central server. You want to go back and look at your admin privileges. Who's out there with all this change? Were they all of a sudden people given admin privileges to make this happen quickly? Go back and let's refine those. RDS, remote desktop services, routers. This, I haven't seen anyone doing it, but I've been recommending it to companies, is that send a router to that home. Put your own router in there that you can control and help protect. It is an open door into the home environment, and I think it's been overlooked. Endpoint security, always a big topic of mine, one of my favorite. It should be there already. If not, make it happen. Of course, VPN and containers should be considered as well. So I don't want to go too long, but I want to touch on this last topic, which is the best of times, and it'll be a short introduction. And maybe another time I'll talk about this more, but it's the age of digital transformation. This is really a wonderful time of what's happening in the supply chain to meet demand. And these are out there, and we shouldn't ignore the elephant in the room. Now that elephant, that's technology. And that herd can be of all different types of technology that's out there. I personally see robotics as the largest elephant there, but then you also have blockchain and AI and so forth, and they're coming and they're growing. And to keep with our work from home, we have to have our work from home elephant as well. So let's talk about briefly robotics. I was at a trade show, a huge trade show, just before everything shut down. And the robotics is mainstream. There are just hundreds of businesses there with their particular robotics that were picking and packing and so forth. And it is in mainstream of the supply chain and the factories. It's no longer, and it hasn't been for a while, but it's really spread out and deeply into the different large and small factories. Because one reason is they don't have the employees. They don't have enough employees that are going to come that are going to handle these functions, so they have to really rely on robotics. In the lower right-hand corner are the, you might have seen these, are the Amazon robots. Went up and visited. There's I don't know if you're going to be able to do this anytime soon, but up in Baltimore, one of the Amazon warehouses, you're able to go in and watch these in action. Actually get a tour of the whole facility, which is fascinating. And Amazon is an innovator, true innovator. They took this warehouse function and turned it upside down. It used to be, let's say if you go to IKEA, right? If you go to IKEA, you would walk into the stacks and you would pull out the particular product that you want to use, and then you would walk it up and cash it out, right? You would put it on the carrier and so forth. That was the function. You go and retrieve it. Amazon flipped it totally over, and they said, no, we're going to bring the product to the picker instead of having the picker go to the product. And so if you're not familiar, these little robots will go under one of those stands, and you can see those stands are maybe about 2.5 feet square, and they will go under and lift it up. And if you look to the lower picture on the left-hand side, you can see one of them under those stands. It lifts it up and moves it, okay, and brings it to the picker who pulls the items out. So the innovation has changed it, and speed so rapid, because the picker just has to pull it right there, put it in the box and move it on, as opposed to having to walk and go find something. So very effective. They've done a marvelous job. If you ever get a chance to visit that, I suggest you do. Blockchain, AI, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, IoT, telemetrics. This is a great area of the field. I would love to talk about it. We're up against time, so I'm going to just mention it. And blockchain in particular, which is something that I really enjoy, is really changing the industry all for the better. But again, I see that we're coming up on time, so let me just give you a couple topics to follow as we wrap up. One is the supply chain risk management. It's a whole area of study if this is something that interests you, because what it does is risk management. It's helping to mitigate that supply side risk that we've been talking about today. It also looks at things like not being beholden to one area for the products, like China, for instance. Also, it looks not just at one thing, it looks at geographical, economic, political risks, and takes the broad view that really all these different things impact the supply chain. NIST, there's a link you can go to. They do a fine job. And again, they're taking information technology and operation technology, IT and OT, and looking at them together to bring them together and look at them as a whole, really going through the entire cycle of a system from design, development, distribution, deployment, acquisition, maintenance, and destruction, the whole thing. So that wraps up my talk, and thank you for letting me enjoy lunchtime with you.
Thank you, Scott. Very informative. Learned a whole lot. So I will start off with a few questions. I guess you talked about started with toilet paper. Not sure if this is relevant, but I'm gonna go ahead and ask anyways. Why do you think well, a lot of people went for toilet paper versus food, water, and shelter during a pandemic? So about 2 months ago, I remember being at one of the grocery stores. I had a lot of food in my shopping cart, and then this other guy right next to me, like 4, bundles of toilet paper.
You know, it's once one person starts it, we're a pack mentality, aren't we? That I think a few people went for that, and then it kind of turned the light on for others, saying, "Oh, we need to run out and take care of this, because if other people are going to have it, we need to have it." And it became a national humor, but in fact, it did hurt the supply chain. Why? That's a good question. I'd love to be able to poll these people, but I think the herd mentality came into play at some point, where even personally we're like, well, I guess we have to go buy toilet paper before it's all gone, So we actually went to Costco and there's no toilet paper. So next time it came, we made sure we bought it. So again, it became its snowball effect on that, I think.
Thank you. I think that was good. When you were talking about, I don't know if you want to go back a few slides back on the technologies at home for work from home slide, you talked about VDI solutions, you talked about VPNs, and those are all normal things that people are used to. But then you brought up a really important point, at least I had not considered or heard of, giving people routers to deploy it at their homes for better,
Yes.
security and control. So can you expand on that? What does that mean?
Well, no one's talking about it, number one, but I've been advising my customers that this would be a good way to go. But your router at your home is your true first line of defense that's coming in. Many routers, for instance, I don't want to talk about products, but many routers that are provided are never updated. So the ISP might be providing a router to you that is simply out of date. They might not update it. That was the case for me, at least. And so what happens, I was having repeated problems, but also it opened up the vulnerabilities. And there's many products out there that you can go and have your own and install your own. My point is, for the companies, it's in their best interest from a cybersecurity standpoint to go buy routers at a discount rate, because you can buy a large number of them, and simply provide them to your remote workers, and with the instructions and the support to get them set up, which usually are pretty straightforward. And it also can be controlled remotely to secure it. So it gives the cybersecurity professional another tool in order to protect the flow of information. Of course, VPN can help that as well. But again, I think the routers have been overlooked. Just a thought.
Got
and I
it.
don't sell routers.
I see. Now, I think that's a really interesting perspective. So there's another question here. Do you think it's necessary to evolve your incident response capabilities to support supply chain incidents during the pandemic?
I think that's what's going to come out of all this. I think what the cybersecurity folks I've been talking to, it's been a rapid change to look at their their plans, and their incident response were not in place. They were not. They were caught off guard. So by all means, it's time to revisit that, because there could be more. With the, like I said, with the open field, with the broad base of attack surface that has now been opened up, it will come. You have to be able to have that rapid response and put that in place. And that's where a lot of people are lacking, because it hit everybody. And it's not, I don't want to fault anyone here. It's just that it hit everyone. These are the things you need to go back and start revisiting and rebuilding.
Got it. Thank you, Scott. So another question about small businesses. You had a slide talking about, people getting sick and not being able to go to work. As a small business, usually when you have an IT or a cyber professional, they're doing multiple jobs.
Mm.
So if that person is out, so as an executive and as an advisor, what's your recommendation when something like that happens? Should we cross-train, or should we, hire external, outsource some of that work during the pandemic? So can you just, if you elaborate on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think it's cross-training is, now all of a sudden you see the need for it, right? Before it was not given as much emphasis, though you do have turnover in employees. But all of a sudden now someone's taken away very quickly. So cross-training is always the best option. But I do feel that you should have a connection with a managed service provider. Because I found that even for customers that I had some work with, if something happened, I was able to quickly step in and address their issues, because I already had mapped their system. I knew how things worked and so forth. And I could keep a contract with them, an opening that I had on a certain level, a lower level of, so it wasn't too deep a cost for them, but it gave them the backup. I think everybody should have that. I don't see why you wouldn't. You want to negotiate something that is reasonable, but you have to be able to pull on a professional who's totally focused on this, because you as a small businessman, and I've run my own companies, I know you're handling everything, and you're pulled to this operations situation. You're pulled to dealing with staff and so forth, and all the things that come with that. That you can rely and outsource some of that, I think is essential. And I think it should be ingrained, and it's not that costly to do so for a small business.
Thank you, Scott. So I assume that with that comes a lot of stress, on people, owners, as well as employees. Yeah, so what's your advice for everyone listening to this call, or everyone that's going to go back and watch this video, and especially to those suppliers? I think you had a meat plant earlier, meat processing plant. So a lot of people are sick. So what's your advice to them in terms of how to keep emotional health in check, to make sure that there's a balanced approach between work life, your emotional well-being, as well as what you're supposed to do on the job?
Well, and the way I'd answer that is you have to get right down and get involved with your employees. On large factories like that, there shouldn't be this separation, which many times happens between those out in the shop and those sitting in the office. If you don't have that connection, you got to go establish it. If you can't walk down on the floor, why do you expect your employees to walk down on the floor and feel threatened? You have to put the right, right now they're dealing with this. What I'm seeing is a lot of shields going up. So between one person right next to the next person, it's a glass shield. That at least starts to help that, look, they're trying to do something. The masks don't protect you, they protect the other people. So providing masks when you're in that close situation, and redesigning. We didn't go into this, but really just think of what's going to happen on office furniture. Everything has to be redesigned, whether you're in a packing plant or you're in the office. Operations have to be redesigned to spread people out until you have the comfort level. But again, that emotional help, these people are sick. You have to protect them. And you, as the leader of that business, you got to put yourself in that situation and walk down the floor, be on the floor, show yourself, be among them, so that not only they don't feel alone or that they're simply not cared for. I think that's very important. It's the human contact.
Thank you. I think that's amazing. So thanks again, Scott. Very informative presentation, and thank you for everyone that joined us today. Before I let you go, I'm going to share my slides just to remind you of a few other events that we have coming up for this week as a reminder. Can you see this browser that I have open here? So we have COVID-19 Global Perspective on Technology and Change with ISAC London and Singapore chapters, which Scott will be leading. That's Thursday morning. There is no registration for this. However, all the information is down here, down below. If you go to our site, you will see that. Please join us then. And then that afternoon, as part of our virtual workshops, we have use of obfuscation techniques and malware. We often talk about malicious software, but most of us or most people in the industry don't really understand how that happens in the background. So amazing presentation again by a director at Recorded Future. So this one requires registration. Please register. And so yeah, after that, Scott, thanks again. This presentation is recorded. We will get it up on our site within the next few days. Scott, appreciate your time.
Great.
And everyone else, stay healthy and hope to see you Thursday.
Bye-bye.